Hi guys, let's go watching. Just before that, subscribe and enjoy yourself. This time it will be different. In the middle of the pitch black night, somewhere in the depths of the dungeon, the girl repeated this phrase like a mantra. The sound of blood drops added even more horror to the darkness. This knocking is interrupted only by the words that she will no longer be attached to them. Sitting on her knees, chained up, the heroine felt the floor and drew. Only now, after her fifth rebirth, has she realized this. The realization that for that man and his entire family, she was a miserable doll to be thrown away after use. As she continued to paint, she remembered her past lives. In her first life, she was uneducated. In her second life, she tried to become famous all over the world. In the third and fourth, the girl tried to imitate her as much as possible. Thinking about all this, the heroine never stopped painting. She bled out as if her eyes had become sighted again. She admits to herself that she really tried to keep her away from that man, but in the end, her life turned into a tragedy. She painted it as if it was not the first time, as if she knew the sign by heart, every detail, every angle. It was her cry of the soul, all four souls. It was a shared pain combined with magic. She tried so hard to become a lover, but it turned out that all her efforts were in vain. From now on, she is... After saying these words, her hand touched the drawn symbol. Suddenly, the world changed. Rays appeared from the sign and pierced her body, and time stopped. For a moment, everything alive became dead. Now she doesn't need anything from anyone. A girl wakes up to a strong smell of perfume, which gives her a headache. She opens her eyes and looks at her hands. They were gentle, well-groomed hands without a single scratch. Is she back? After getting out of bed a little, the unbearable headache spread throughout his body. The heroine really came back, only at a time when nothing had happened yet. After regaining full consciousness, she struggled to get down to the edge of the bed and tried to take a step. Weakness in her legs, numbness in her hands, and dizziness did not allow her to stand firmly on her feet. The last phrases were ringing in my ears and my eyes were dark. She fell to the ground. This happens every time. That's the price for moving in time. The girl knows that only people with natural powers can do such things, so it's only natural that her body became like this. As a result of the fall, the bottle of perfume tumbled to the ground, creating a loud noise that brought the maid running. Upon entering the room, the maid asked if everything was all right with the lady, and I got the answer that everything was fine. "You are bleeding! What happened?" the maid asked, without a drop of sympathy for Suriella. Holding her nose because of the bleeding, the heroine said she had fallen. The maid looked at the lady with suspicion. Her eyes were clearly distrustful of what she was hearing, and the heroine realized it. It occurred to the girl that the servants probably thought she had harmed herself the day before the official move to the palace. Well, in the castle, she has to play the role of the emperor's terrible and crazy beloved. And she knows herself. No one would believe that the heroine is happy with this fate. When I tried to get up, I felt dizzy again. She uses all her powers left over from the time travel, but it gives little result. The maid saw the lady staggering and offered to help her. The maid said that the lady had to wash her face. She prepares a basin for her to wash in, and in the meantime, holding out a handkerchief, she stops the bleeding and disappears from the room. The sun's rays peeped into the room through a light curtain. Suriella went to the window. She wanted to experience the reality of this world, to make sure that it was not a dream and that her eyes were seeing the real thing. Pulling back the curtain and opening the window, the girl felt the reality of the fifth rebirth. The wind blew her hair in different directions, and the shining sun blinded her eyes. The curtains rustled over the windows, and fresh air enveloped her cheeks. Suriella took a deep breath. The air expanded his lungs like a newborn baby. All her thoughts evaporated for a moment, and she felt great relief. Well, now she is much better. Suddenly, the short-lived peace was broken by terrible memories. The unknown madam is not happy with her hair color. It looks as if it is smeared in ash, adding that at least her face is beautiful. At first, the woman turned away indifferently and walked on, but after a few steps, something made her turn around and she said, either with an insolent or sympathetic look, that she would take the girl. The war that started because of continental integration is over. After that, when persecution of religious people began everywhere, in every country, Suryella's biological parents abandoned her. The little poor girl was forced to live in a ruined church, sleep on the cold floor, and live all her troubles alone. This continued until she was found and taken to an orphanage. It was then that the Duchess of Lune, the head of one of the most prestigious houses in the empire, adopted the main character. It is impossible to describe the girl's delight. Her happiness knew no bounds. Suryella thought she was in a fairy tale about a princess. The maid's words brought back memories of that time. Reluctantly, she opened her eyes and looked at the maid. "The wash basin is ready," the latter said. Suryella sits on the bed and waits for the maid to get everything ready. The woman decides to inform the heroine that her ladyship wants to talk to her, so she must do all the work quickly and go upstairs as soon as possible. While the heroine was washing her face, the maid noticed that the window was open and the wind was blowing through the room and went to close it. Suryella did not quite understand this act and asked to leave the window open. The maid was stunned, as if she had not expected any objection from the girl. She reminds her that Her Highness does not like it when a fragrant smell escapes from the room. The heroine recalls that the Duchess constantly tells her that she smells terrible, which is why scented candles should always be burning in her rooms. Earlier, Suryella had convinced herself that her ladyship was so concerned about her. The girl repeated in a rough but calm voice that she should leave the window open. In response, the maid had no choice but to answer and do as she was asked. "Yes, sir," she muttered under her breath. The servants began to dress the heroine. The comb seemed to pull the strings of the puppet she was. Suryella realized that if she didn't want to live like a doll in someone else's hands, to be used and thrown away, she needed to get rid of it all. "I already had a goal in mind, but it was not so easy to achieve. You can't just run away because you don't have your own money. Even her personal jewelry is brought by the maid only when she needs to go out, and she is the only one who wears it. Even now, the maid takes the jewelry out of the chest and puts it around the heroine's neck." Suryella realizes that she needs to think about every moment, from how to raise money, to escape from the palace, to options for earning a living. In a year, the Emperor's true beloved will return, and by then she must not only figure out what to do, but also put it all into practice. In her stream of thought, she was oblivious to how she found herself in the corridor, fully dressed and ready to go. She was wearing the most expensive dress in the palace, precious stones that shimmered with brilliance, but she lacked the only thing, peace in her soul. For the only thing that did not give this peace was a firm decision that by the time the Emperor's beloved returned, she must prepare everything for her release. Suryella followed the maid down a long, bright corridor. Although it was spacious, she felt more cramped than in prison. Closed windows, dead silence, broken only by the clicking of shoes. After a few meters, the heroine felt dizzy again. Breathing became deep and frequent. Suryella began to choke. She didn't understand whether it was because the corridor was stuffy or because she hadn't left after her rebirth. Her heartbeat increased and she felt a sharp pain in her chest. This pain was like a fire that spread throughout my body. Suryella cried out, "Ouch!" The pain was so intense that she could not stand on her feet. The maid turned around at the cry, seeing the scene once again. The girl was scared because she had never had such a condition. The maid, hearing her heavy breathing, thought that maybe the girl was deliberately pretending to be sick so as not to go to the Duchess. When I offered to help her up, Suryella said that she was unlikely to be able to do so. The protagonist asked me to tell her mother that she would be late and that when she felt better, she would come to her. Not happy with what she heard, the maid rolled her eyes and replied, "Okay." The maids turned around and left the girl alone on the floor in the middle of a long corridor and left, despite her condition and heavy breathing. Suddenly, footsteps could be heard in the distance. It was Ramiho. Looking dismissively at Suryella's condition, he asked her what she was doing here. Stammering, the girl could not string together the words to describe her condition and replied that she had just sat down to rest. The man asked her if she really decided to just take a break in the middle of the corridor, having in her mind the arrogant idea that no amount of training would fix someone like her, a person of ignoble origin. After briefly worrying about the heroine, he walks away and says from behind her that tomorrow she will officially enter the palace, so let her return to her room and take care of herself and her appearance. Suriella remembered that she used to think that he spoke to her like that because he was worried. She asked Remiho if he had been born a girl, would he have liked her more? She did not expect a response from him, as if she knew that he would give her another dismissive look and leave, but the man looked at her in surprise and asked what nonsense was in her head. Remiho is an arrogant and cold man whose anger is only due to his gender. If he had been born a girl, he would have been married off to the emperor, and the House of Loon would have had great power. But Remiho was the first child, and Jeremy was the second. There were only boys in this family. The Duchess was carrying a daughter, but the child was born dead. That's why she decided to adopt Suriella as a last resort, to make her a weapon for her family. As a puppet of the Loon family, if the girl marries the emperor and gives birth to a child, Remiho, who would become the next head of the house, will become the next head of the house. Remiho would be able to enjoy his family's golden age for the rest of his life, so it makes sense that he wants to see Suriella safely and without any problems in the palace. All these thoughts were interrupted by the man's words. He asked me not to create any unnecessary problems for him and to prepare for his visit to the palace tomorrow. Well, the heroine used to think he was heartless, but now she sees all his emotions in the palm of her hand. Freed from the urge to justify someone, the girl took a step back. When I saw the full picture, I realized that there was no problem. Without realizing it, Suriella came into the room. She didn't want to sleep, but her body was so exhausted that as soon as her head touched the pillow, a deep sleep relaxed her entire body. She woke up the next morning. My eyes were filled with sadness. This day has come again, the day of the visit to the palace, where the fate of her 5th rebirth will be decided. "You're awake, mistress," I heard from behind the door. The girl replied that she could come in. With the opening of the doors, a real fuss began. The servants were holding all the necessary things for that day. A silk dress that shimmered in the light with all possible colors, aristocratically restrained, and at the same time, which will emphasize all the charms. The jewelry of the Loon family, which was supposed to impress the emperor. All this was prepared for this day. Suriella felt hopeless. There was nothing she could do now. She could not run away or refuse. The only thing to do is to stand still in front of a mirror and be a doll being taken to a medical examination. Suddenly, the door opened quickly and violently, frightening all the servants. The Duchess came into the room. She had just been informed that the girl had fallen yesterday. Suriella quietly asked whether she should go to the palace and whether it was so necessary, to which Madame replied with the question, "Are you afraid?" The girl said that she was not afraid at all, but before she could continue, the Duchess began to sigh languidly and take slow steps towards the heroine. Madame said that she understood. She must have a lot on her mind because of the scandalous rumors that were circulating in the city about His Majesty. Coming closer to the girl, the Duchess leaned over and squeezed the heroine's shoulder tightly. He emphasized that, first of all, Suriella should think that if she wins the Emperor's heart and is able to give birth to an heir, she will get everything she can dream of from this life. But the girl understood perfectly well what this meant. She had to sacrifice herself for the sake of the Loon family. Mrs. Loon admitted that she was not really happy about the fact that Suriella had to imitate that poor Hainan maiden, but she had no choice. His Majesty wanted only her. The heroine knew that Lady Hainan would return in a year and what this return would lead to, and decided to ask Madame if she had attended Charlotte's funeral, to which she received an affirmative answer. As if with the curiosity of a child, she continued to ask if her mother was sure that it was Charlotte, expecting to hear at least some confirmation that it was not her. Recalling the events of that time, the woman said that the body of the Emperor's beloved was partially torn, but it most closely resembled the daughter of the Hainan family. The heroine was horrified. She was frightened by these words. How could it be torn? The lady got angry with Suriella. She didn't like all these questions and shouted that enough of these stupid questions. Grabbing the girl's hands, she pulled her to the mirror, telling her that as long as she did everything they taught her, there was no reason to worry or fear that she would repeat the fate of that lady. Then, in a calmer voice, reassuring Suriella, the foster mother asked her not to be nervous because she was one of them. The woman gestured to the maids, who had been standing aside all this time, to bring the box with the main beauty. This beauty was earrings, but unusual, as you might think from the outside. The white gold was encrusted with diamonds, and the centrally placed deep red ruby attracted attention with some magical power. Miss Moon put the earrings on Suriella's ears and spoke softly, as if ordering her to shine like Charlotte. Suddenly, his face was framed by golden red strands of hair. They came down in light waves on my shoulders and back. The eyes of a rich green color stood out on his face. From now on, she is gone. She will not live by someone else's rules. End of chapter. The whole family gathered in front of the Lund's estate. The Duchess Remiho, her younger brother, and the maids all came out to see Suriella off. Walking to the carriage, she recalls that she had never said goodbye to them before leaving for the imperial palace. At the time, she sincerely believed that if she managed to give birth to a child, as her family wanted, it would help her return home. Thinking that she might not have another chance, Suriella turned and thanked them with a slight bow. For a moment, the eyes of the lady and the girl met. There was hope in both eyes. Only Suriella had the hope of staying, and the Duchess had the hope of a successful marriage with the Emperor. Without saying a word, the heroine headed for the carriage and went to His Majesty's palace. Dark clouds towered over the castle like giant guards guarding secrets, pulling the towers into the abyss. The Emperor was sitting in a dark room. His exhausted appearance and eyes, which had not seen normal sleep for several weeks in a row, added to his gloom. And then he is informed that she, Charlotte, from the Heinen house, has arrived. Upon entering the room, Suriella recalls their previous first meetings. They were never romantic. At the Emperor's feet lay another murdered innocent person, to which the girl was not surprised. The thunder and lightning added mystery to the meeting. When he saw that the girl who entered did indeed look like Charlotte, he stood up and asked, "Lottie?" Blood was visible on the Emperor's cheek, and his eyes were filled with hope that it was indeed his beloved. As he approached Suriella, the man gently put his hand on the girl's cheek. "Lottie," the man repeated again, and it seemed that the expected hug was about to take place. But suddenly his mind went blank, and he pushed the girl a few meters away from him. Did he realize it wasn't Charlotte? It seems that the Emperor does not realize what he is doing. Indignation coursed through his veins, which provoked shortness of breath, causing his lungs to inhale oxygen twice as fast. The man began to ruffle his hair without realizing what was happening to him, but after a moment he felt a loss of interest in the situation. Looking through the prism of his fingers at the girl's condition, he seems to have truly realized that he had found Charlotte again. At the same moment, the Emperor rushed to Suriella. He begged me not to leave him and never to do that again. The man has lost his sanity and now needs only an outer shell named Charlotte. He continued to mumble and ask Suriella to stay, doing so as if he were saying a curse. The girl came out of the Emperor's chambers and told the servants that he had fallen asleep, and now she wanted to be escorted to the rooms prepared for her. Suriella came into the room. Those rooms had everything she asked for. The table was breaking down from the number of dishes being cooked. There was everything from light appetizers to appetizing roast duck. After sitting at the table, Suriella was informed that a doctor would visit her after she finished the meal. The girl hadn't eaten anything since the morning, because in the course of these events, thoughts of food would have been completely meaningless. But after meeting the Emperor, she felt that she needed to somehow recuperate. Taking a piece in her mouth, the heroine felt a sharp pain. The coughing tore at the girl's chest. Covering her mouth from coughing, the heroine was suddenly terrified. There was blood on his hand. It occurred to Suriella that her body was probably too crippled to eat food in the usual way. But she was even more terrified when she thought that the next rebirth might not happen if she felt so bad afterwards. The maid was frightened by her mistress's condition and asked her to rest while she went to call a doctor. While waiting for the doctor, the protagonist got a gem. She miraculously received it, insisting that she really needed it. Looking at it, I was thinking about the value of the stone and how to get money for it. She knew that this chain was so expensive that it would be easily traced if sold and probably wouldn't make any money, because after the sale, the Lund's house would easily find her. Suriella continued to consider different options. She even thought about going to the black market, but she knew perfectly well that they wouldn't pay even a quarter of the stone's value. No matter how offensive it is, there is no way out yet. A moment of reflection was interrupted by the maid. She said that the doctor was here and ready to examine her. The inspection lasted several minutes. The lady expressed her heart to Suriella, asked to perform various manipulations on her to better collect information about her condition and give an accurate diagnosis. With fear, the doctor said, what the heroine was about to hear might be shocking, but based on her condition, she was more like a corpse. The doctor was afraid to continue and began to stutter, that had risen from the dead. The lady also noted that since Suriella was coughing up blood, she had a year or two to live. She asked if there was a way to cure her as soon as possible. The woman in the white coat said that she had never met a single person with a similar condition, so the treatment she was recommending might not have a perfect effect. After hearing the conclusion, the heroine asked that her condition remain between them and His Majesty did not know anything, to which the doctor was surprised to ask why she wanted to do this, since she was his only beloved girl. Suriella says that this is why she asks that her condition be kept secret, because His Grace will certainly be angry if he finds out. The doctor said that the medication was not perfect, but the heroine forced herself to take it with food to make her condition better. At other times, the girl will pretend to be Charlotte in the arms of that man. He calls her Lottie and is clearly obsessed with her, but he has never touched her body. This was the case in both past and present lives. Their embrace was interrupted by the words of a servant who said that the Duchess of Hainan had come to the palace to see Charlotte. As if Suriella hadn't heard what he had said, the emperor pulled back the girl's hair and said in her ear that her mother was here. An older woman was sitting in the garden. It was Charlotte's mother. Anxiously sipping tea from a glass, she waited for her. She was a lady who really missed her child and wanted to see him more than anything. Suriella walked calmly to the garden. She wasn't going to pretend in front of the woman. "Oh, my dear!" the woman cried out, but suddenly the image of Suriella appeared with the image of her real daughter. A mother can tell the difference, by emotion, smile, even by voice. The anger of what she saw ravaged the soul of the mother who lost her daughter. "Who the hell is she to think she can afford this?" the Duchess said, and hit the table so that a cup of tea spilled over the table. She claimed that Suriella's appearance in this form was simply unheard of audacity and swung to hit the main character. But the girl did not allow him to do so, stopping his hand. She will no longer allow her body to be abused. Holding his hand, Suriella said through her teeth that there were too many eyes watching them and that Miss Hainan needed to be careful. Suri continued to say that she may be a miserable shell, but it is unlikely that the Duchess would want to see the mark of a slap on her daughter's cheek. This convinced the woman to put her hand down and think about some things. It was as if something had come to her mind. The House of Luns had gone completely mad. To become the head of the family, Duchess Long killed close relatives and kept getting pregnant to give birth to a daughter. But when she became infertile, she killed her husband. And now she is using her younger daughter for her power? After these thoughts, Miss Hainan seemed to go crazy. She clung to the heroine's shoulders and demanded answers. Is Suriella pretending to be her daughter to get the Emperor's heart? As she continued to shake the girl's body, she was interested in only one thing, whether she was carrying His Majesty's child. Suri was silent. She had nothing to say, and this irritated the woman even more. The heroine's tired look showed the hopelessness of her situation. She could not admit that Charlotte's mother was right and the purpose of her visit to the palace. Miss Hainan must have realized this, as her lowered eyes and trembling body suggested. She gave up, turned away, and asked Suriella not to pretend to be her daughter anymore. The girl replied that she could not do so, adding that the Duchess had not taken advantage of the chance she had once been given. Long ago, in times of darkness, when demons were everywhere, a dragon descended to the earth and watched human despair. He chose 5 talented people, the best in the fields of alchemy, magic, valiology, art, and fencing, and gave them a task. The 5 apostles, chosen by the dragon, joined forces with him to cast out all the demons and eventually create a nation. Then the dragon promised the apostles that the followers of their talent would take turns being his companions. The dragon's promise was passed down from one generation to the next. The Hainan house was the first to go. Behind it is the House of the Moons. But the previous emperor suddenly broke his promise and allowed a commoner to become his lover. Because of the former emperor's unheard-of act, The current emperor, Raimund, was born with blue eyes instead of the golden ones that symbolize the imperial family. The House of Heinen was unable to give birth to a companion for the emperor, so it was the turn of the House of Lun. But when they failed, opportunity knocked again on the door of the House of Heinen, who had lost their chance in the last generation. Suriella told the Duchess that Charlotte was dead, and that it was wrong that it was now the turn of the House of Luna. These words made the lady feel unusual emotions of anger. She was not prepared for such audacity on the part of Suriella. The girl did not forget to add that if the Duchess of Lun wanted to say anything else on the subject, she should meet with her mother instead of trying to get into a fight with her. Suri's words horrified the lady. Mother? How dare she say such things to her face? The woman's mind exploded, remembering her Charlotte and how gently she said it. The woman added that Suriella has no right to call Miss Lun Mom as long as she has her daughter's face. The main character saw her condition. She sympathized with her as a mother, knowing that today's meeting had killed her last hope for a living daughter. Suri said that the Duchess was probably upset because she had seen her Charlotte for the first time in a short time. Loud sobs echoed throughout the garden. It seems that they cannot continue the conversation any further. Moving away a few meters, Suriella asked the servants to wait in the garden and escort the Duchess when she was ready. Meanwhile, she was thinking about what had happened. A month has passed since Charlotte's death became public knowledge, but Suri knew that she, Charlotte, would return in a year. During its absence, it recovers from a major event and its existence is kept secret. But given the Duchess of Heinen's reaction, Suriella may think Charlotte is actually dead. And if that's true, then... The heroine's thoughts were interrupted by a severe headache. The ground abruptly left my feet. I could hear ringing in my ears, and my face turned pale. The girl lost consciousness. The girl woke up in her room. She asked herself, was it just another fainting spell? Lying with her back to the door and thinking about her condition, Suri heard slow footsteps. She turned around and saw a frightened emperor. He was concerned about her health. "Are you okay, Lottie?" he asked. Sitting by Shuri's bedside, the emperor looked at her condition. The dark room and silence made both characters feel awkward. Raimund's long and piercing gaze was filled with a desire to look only at Lottie. In his heavenly eyes there was pity, sadness, and passion. He wanted to touch his beloved's hand, repeating her name gently but obsessively. When she touched it, Suriella felt pain in her arm. It felt like a squeezing sensation that spread upward toward the shoulder and even reached the neck. The emperor was frightened by the girl's anxious face and asked her what was hurting her and why. Recalling how Duchess Heinen grabbed her arm in the garden today, the heroine concluded that she had most likely injured her wrist tendons. Continuing to sit next to me on the chair, Raimund began to speak monotonously. He thought that he would lose her again, never see her again, or breathe in the smell of her hair. Suriella listened to all this and sadly realized that this man knew that she was not Charlotte. If she takes off her earrings and with her real appearance makes an effort to just look like Charlotte, he will treat her like a stranger. The emperor said that if she needed anything, she should just ask. In fact, Raimund ignores reality and worships its shell. So how can such a man who rejects reality help Suriella and give her what she wants? The ruler also added that if the girl was his from head to toe, he would give her anything. A question arose in Suri's mind. Will she be able to give her heart as well? Which she really doubted very much. In my past 5 lives after rebirth, this never happened. Trying to take advantage of the opportunity, Suri said that if he could give her anything, then let it be a gemstone. The emperor reacted to this request with surprise, but still did not say a word. The girl added that if there are no gems, money will do. The heroine was well aware that the real young lady Charlotte would never say such a thing. But Suriella needs money more than anything else in the world if she is going to escape from here. The man asked if that was all she wanted and if she needed anything else. The girl looked at Raimund affirmatively and nodded her head. The emperor got up from his chair, first stopped for a minute, and then sat down on the bed next to the heroine. Touching her cheeks timidly, he added that if she wanted, she would receive the entire mine as a gift from him. Several weeks have passed since that moment, and all the while His Majesty has been sending gems to Suriella whenever he has the opportunity. The jewelry was different, from small rubies to diamond-encrusted necklaces. Among the gifts were gold coins. One day, among the gifts, Shuri took a liking to one stone that looked no different from the others, only slightly tinged with red and pink. The stone gave the heroine strength. It was enough to look at the jewelry for a few minutes. Once, during another of Suriella's dressing-up sessions, the maids began to chatter loudly. They asked the girl if it was true that she had fainted after receiving the dragon's heart, and it must have touched her very much. In her past lives, what the servants meant, Suriella would have had to guess for herself, because they had never spoken to her like that before. While looking through the gifts, the heroine noticed that one of the maids was watching her closely. She thought that this moment was her chance and she had to take it. "Want some?" asked Suri, holding out a stone. The maid looked at the heroine in surprise, and she replied embarrassedly that she didn't need it. She was grateful for the offer, but she wasn't ready to accept such generosity right now. Suriella said she wanted to exchange the stone for something she didn't have. The maid wondered what she could have that a young lady of a noble family did not. Suri continued that it could be, for example, copper or silver coins in her pocket. Unexpected to hear this from her mistress, the maid mumbled that her money was not enough. Seeing that the maid was hesitating, Suriella thought she had to come up with something else to finally convince the maid. "I need them for my collection," said the heroine. The girl blushed and mentally mistook Suriella for a rich girl with nothing to do. Suri said that she had a lot of precious stones and gold coins, but no silver and copper coins, which she would like very much. "It's just an exchange, not free, so the maid has nothing to worry about. There will be no problems." The maid said that if the lady needed her coins, she would be more than happy to exchange them with her. The maids who stayed in the palace during the darkness are helpless young ladies. They all need money, so they will soon get used to this exchange, and they will become allies of Suriella, opening their hearts to her. Suri knew that she could not easily exchange precious stones and gold coins, so this way with maids was the safest. Recently, the duration of the Emperor's madness phase has increased, so the character has more time to walk and recuperate. She was always accompanied by a bodyguard. One day while walking, she felt her heartbeat quicken and she became dizzy. She decided to sit by the fountain and calm her heart a little. Fresh air and fragrant flowers helped to improve her condition, but what was going through her mind is unknown. The flowers got tangled in the heroine's hair and then landed on the water. It added to the mystery. She quietly but confidently addressed the guard with a request. "Miss, could you please lend me your sword for a second?" said Suriella. On an unclear day, during a gloomy week, someone's screams could be heard far from the palace. It was the cry of Emperor Raimund. His body was covered in hot sweat, and the pain forced him to kneel. His skin was covered with petrified scales, and sharp claws sprouted through his fingers. The king felt a strong indignation that made him suffocate. He thought that his soul was about to split in two. In an instant, fiery wings were born on the emperor's back, and his eyes lit up with the desire to destroy everything. Holding her sword in her hands, Suriella turned to the thunder coming from the palace. The lady from whom she asked for the sword said that the weather had suddenly turned bad. Continuing, she said that the weapon could be dangerous, and it was better to put it away and return to the castle. "Heavy," flashed through Suri's mind. The character used to train because Charlotte was a skilled fencer. Her body remembers the techniques she learned well. But now, because of her weakness in this life, she cannot even hold a sword properly. It will be difficult to escape in this state. Suriella heard a strong thud, followed by the words of the maids, who shouted for His Majesty to restrain himself. It surprised and frightened her at the same time. The maids ran to meet the heroine to inform her that the emperor was behaving foolishly. How stupid is this? The girl thought. Suddenly the sky became even darker, and Suri found herself in the shadows. Looking up, she saw Raimund above her with terrible big wings and burning eyes. The lady next to her began to stumble over her words, and the heroine herself was terrified. Then the same miss immediately got down on one knee and ordered everyone to do so and pay homage to the king. Staggering, the creature landed near Suriella. The emperor said that no one but the lady had the right to raise her head and look at His Majesty. The heroine was very scared because he had never behaved like that before, and now he is unable to perceive anyone else but his chosen one. Reaching his hand to the girl's hair, he slowly pushed it back. Although in reality, it was hardly a hand. They were the claws of a beast on a human body. Suri did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, the emperor waved his hand and wanted to strike Suriella, but she managed to hide behind her sword. The sword split on impact, and its fragments flew at the heroine and threw her several meters away. "Ouch!" the girl screamed. Taking step by step, the Emperor, with an angry and crazed look, came closer and closer to Shuri. She barely raised her head and looked at him, not wanting to believe that he was going to kill her. As he approached, he hit her again. There was blood everywhere, and there was no living space left on the girl. The maids saw all this, but how could they help her, especially when it was their emperor? While still conscious, coughing up blood and holding on to her amulet as her last hope, she did not want to die. She simply cannot die now and under such circumstances. But there was still something interesting about the emperor. One of his hands was normal, like a human's, and the other had beast-like claws. One eye had a blue iris, and the other had a yellow iris. Not knowing what this beast would do next, Shuri quietly said to herself that she had to be reborn again. Suddenly, the emperor opened his eyes wide, already blue on both sides, as if waking up from a dream and seeing what he had done. "Lottie," he said with fear. The half-dead girl was lying on the ground, barely breathing. Her eyes were closing and her consciousness was slowly leaving her body. All she heard before she lost consciousness were the emperor's words that he could not lose her again, his heart. Among the rubble of the building, gray stones and bare trees, a child could be heard crying. The girl was standing in a thin dress, the wind was blowing her hair in different directions, and her legs were running with goosebumps. A young man stood next to her, bending down on one knee. Touching her cheek gently, he said that she would forget about him for a while. And if she wants to understand the essence of her dreams, then let her speak. Let him say his name clearly and understandably. That's when everything will fall into place. Opening her eyes as if from a jolt, Suriella woke up in her room. Tears rolled down the girl's eyes, and there was no limit to her surprise. Suddenly, she began to cry bitterly. Wiping her eyes continuously, she could not understand the reason for her tears. Frantically recalling what had happened before she woke up, she repeated as if in syllables that she remembered drawing a circle and then, getting up in bed, she went to the mirror, and lo and behold, what she saw in the mirror made her shiver. She saw Charlotte's reflection in the mirror. Suriella touched her cheekbone to check the authenticity of what she was seeing. After all, it looks different after rebirth. And if it hasn't been reborn, why is there not a scratch on it? The Emperor entered the room. Approaching Suriella, he gently asked her if she was awake and how she was feeling. Did he really do it? The girl thought. The girl turned a split second before he did and asked if he... The Emperor. Had he given her his heart? The Emperor, who also represents a dragon, has two hearts. One is the one everyone knows, and the other is symbolic and is called Elix. If you give Elix to even the weakest girl, she will become strong enough to withstand conceiving a dragon child. Clutching at Raymond's shirt, Suriella screamed for him to take the heart away immediately because she didn't need it now. As she fell down in exhaustion, Suri could not understand why he did this. He didn't give it to her when she really needed it, so why did he donate it now? Raymond could not bear to see the girl in this state and knelt down in front of her. They both sat in the middle of a large room and looked at each other with suffering eyes. He hugged the heroine as if he wanted to shield her from all the troubles in the world, to protect her from everything and even from himself. In this embrace, Suri did not feel truly loved. The question in my mind was, the Emperor knows that she is not Charlotte, so why does he behave like this? Rumors spread among the nobility. Everyone was talking about the fact that the daughter of the House of Luna had been given Elix, and that even the previous king had not taken the necessary measures to... According to the procedure established by the imperial family, someone from the 5 duke families must be present at the ceremony of receiving the elixir. But the Emperor suddenly gave Elix to Charlotte. Everyone was saddened by the king's action, but they had no choice but to accept it. Interrupting Suriella's meal, a servant came into the room and said that there was a letter from the Duchess of Lune for the lady. Suri thought that this letter was most likely similar to the others that the Duchess had sent before. The Duchess of Lune sent letters saying that she was infinitely happy that Suriella had received the Emperor's heart, and that she needed to start preparing for the wedding as soon as possible. These nasty letters kept coming here. With a wave of his hand and a few movements, the letter was engulfed in fire. The heroine knew that the Duchess did not even suspect that she could use the fire spell she had once learned to become the perfect daughter of the House of Lune. Only ashes remained on the metal tray. Suri realized what the wedding would lead to. If it does happen, there will be no turning back. Charlotte will be back soon, so it's time to leave the palace. Not knowing what to invent to escape from the palace, the heroine tried different methods. After thinking about the details for a while, she said to Raymond that she would like to go outside. Raymond looked at Suri inquiringly, and she continued that he had a lot of work to do because of their wedding. And as if begging with kitten eyes, she said that why not go on a picnic before the wedding? The emperor looked at Suriella carefully, sighed, and put down the papers he was looking at. Gently embracing the heroine, he said that if she wanted it, he would be happy to agree. The emperor looked at Suri, or perhaps more correctly Lottie, as the only light in the world. He was in love with her. The next day, everything happened as Raymond had promised. They took a carriage into the forest, away from the palace and prying eyes. They were accompanied by a miss, the same one who had accompanied Suriella in the garden on the day of the emperor's transformation. The wind whistled around them, blowing through Suri's hair. Suddenly, she turned her head and addressed the guard. The latter was surprised by the appeal, because what could a young lady want from her when she was spending time with her lover? Suriella said she had left a basket of snacks for the girl in the carriage. "For me?" the latter asked again. The heroine continued that the miss was likely to get hungry while she was looking after the carriage, so she decided to take care of her. Even the emperor was surprised. When she finished, Suriella took the emperor under her arms and they walked toward the forest, looking for a place to sit. Miss thanked her and bowed her respect. They came across a small clearing in the middle of the forest and decided to stay there. The breeze gently touched the branches of the trees, and the birds never tired of chirping. Suriella gave the emperor a taste of what she had prepared for the picnic. At first, Raymond bit into a piece incredulously, but when he tasted it, he closed his eyes in pleasure. Suri was happy that he liked it and that he was enjoying it so much. After eating, they sat and enjoyed nature, clean air, and the beauty of flowers. Taking in a lungful of air, the man said that he needed to leave the palace as often as possible. Suriella realized that she had to seize the moment and asked the emperor gently and affectionately if he would like to play a game. "A game?" asked Raymond, wondering what he had heard. To which the girl replied in the affirmative and began to rummage through the food basket. She pulled out precious stones from the wickerwork and said that she would hide these precious stones. Instead, he, the king, needs to find them wherever they are. Making a cute face, the heroine asked him once again with a pleading look if he would play. The emperor was interested in this game proposal, and he could not resist his beloved's kittenish look. He nodded his agreement. Suriella smiled. She was glad that she had managed to persuade the king. With her long fingers, the beauty straightened her red-brown hair and pulled on the ribbon that tied her tail. When she approached Raymond, she wanted to blindfold him, to which he reacted too hostilely, grabbing her by the hand. The girl began to explain that she was doing this not because she did not trust him, but because he was an unusual person. Suriella leaned gracefully toward the emperor's lips. Her eyes reflected a light of determination. She said that compared to others, his senses work much better. The man agreed. He sat blindfolded, wrapped in an aura of mystery, like a ruler who lets the game guide his decisions. Jury got up, put on her outer garment, and told the emperor that she needed some time to hide everything. Her gaze is steady but full of determination. Her eyes reflected despair and steadfastness, like a fire that wants to get out from under an invisible embrace. "Will you wait?" she asked her husband. Raymond nodded in response. She smiled and said that she could stay here and count to 1,000. Every step of Suriella was marked by the Tablet of Liberty, trying to escape from the shackles of the emperor's power. A few hours before the picnic, Suriella encountered a maid in the kitchen. The latter was very uncomfortable with what the lady was cooking, saying that she should have asked her. The heroine replied that it was her first picnic with His Majesty, so she wanted to cook the food herself. "She takes care of everything so the maids can go about their business." The girl replied embarrassedly. If the lady still needed help, she should call for it. As soon as the maid left her alone, Suri took out her bag of coins. Her eyes glowed with ingenuity, which was intertwined with radiating confidence. Hands wrapped around the coins as if they were a strategic plan. Finally, she is ready to leave this place. She makes her way through the thick of the forest, her footsteps barely audible, like the whisper of nature embracing her hidden escape. Thanks to his heart, the heroine can now run even with a basket of coins in her hands. But Suriella had the feeling that the Emperor followed her immediately when she had not yet gone too far. So I had to scatter some jewelry to find something for him to do. She hoped that at least this way she could buy a little more time. Each step of the heroine reflected a refined courage, ready to bring the conceived plan to life. Running to the carriage, she saw that the guard was sleeping. So far, everything is going according to plan. She hid some sleeping pills that her doctor had recommended in the food she had left for Miss. Stopping at the carriage, Suriella looked repentantly at the guard. The words of apology floated in the air, but her eyes shone with the light of liberation, ready to disappear into the unknown of the new world. Taking a knife out of the basket, she cut the bridle that held the horse back. The horse, flexing its extraordinary muscles, rose to its hind legs. The huge hooves rise in the air right above Suriella. She was scared, but still tried to calm the animal down. Her voice sounded like a soft melody, filling the atmosphere with gentleness and confidence. Quiet, quiet, everything is fine, she said and offered the horse sweets. With grace and confidence, Suri approached the horse. Lightly and skillfully, as if dancing, she climbed up to the saddle step and then easily climbed into the saddle, like a swallow flying into the sky. Turning around, she checked to see if she had woken the guard and scurried away. Suriella ran among the trunks and between the branches of the trees. Her every movement, deepened by the horse's jumps, told the story of a desperate run. Just in case, the heroine chose a longer route to avoid running into the Emperor if he decided to go looking for her. But she has already decided on the place. It is right at the foot of the palace. In the capital. Suriella stopped. She stands against a background of uncertainty. Her eyes pierce the palace, but they reflect a great number of questions. Remembering that there is a knife in the basket, she takes it out and puts it to her hair. The determination in her eyes shows the weight of the decision. Her long hair is swept to the ground, but her eyes reflect a new beginning like a fresh sheet of paper. Remembering the earrings, Suriella rips them off her ears as if they were a yoke that was strangling her. A heavy jolt turns delicate jewelry into ruins of imperceptible force. In each outburst, the readiness to dissolve the shackles and go into the world of one's own liberation is determined. Immediately after the earrings were destroyed, the red-brown shades of her hair dissipated and ash tones appeared in their place, soft as a fog embracing a new history. People do not look at their feet, and that is why she decided to hide in the capital. Suriella quickly settled into her new place. But under what circumstances and what did she have to go through? While wiping dishes and preparing to open the restaurant, she listened to a story from one of the visitors. He told us that according to legend, when the empire began to aggressively expand its territories, many of the treasures of the conquered nations ended up underground. They say that if you collect them all, you will never need anything else, the man continued. The mention of treasures distracted the heroine from her work, and she thought for a moment. "Are you interested?" asked the gentleman in the gown. The girl replied that she was not at all interested, wiping the cup with even more intensity, as if to show that it was difficult for her to be interested, even if there were a lot of interesting things around. The young man smiled. The conversation is interrupted by a young man who has returned with packages of fresh vegetables and bread. Suriella took the opportunity to say that if the man wanted to fulfill his wish so badly, why not ask Carl? Carl's eyes opened like a book that had been opened to an unexpected page. His expression showed that he was surprised, as if he had swallowed a big spoonful of surprise. "To me?" the man mumbled. Having already realized that it was a joke, Carl asked the young man why he was again taking care of Suriella, to which he replied, "Are you jealous of me?" This question confused the young man. He replied that this was not true and quickly walked away. After sitting down, the man said that he was not looking for someone to use for his own purposes. Watching Suri work on the dishes, his eyes followed every movement of her hands as if they were dancing a gentle melody. He also added that a person may have nothing at all but the desire to change it. The girl looked up and her eyes met the man's. The deep red hues of his eyes emphasized the extreme tension. Like a beast peeking out of the darkness, they are filled with energy and sophisticated instinct. "What do you mean?" asked Suriella. Suri felt as if her soul had been transferred into a fever, and her body was pulsating with all possible waves. The heroine couldn't understand why her head was splitting every time their eyes crossed. She decided to just ignore him. Turning to leave, Suriella asks if the young man should have what he usually orders. Not knowing how to avoid her husband, she asks Carl to talk to the visitor while she takes care of business here. Surprised by the heroine's request, he asked, as if he knew the answer to the question, whether her husband had made strange proposals to her again. Suri's gaze, like a crystal string, gently begged for help, and Carl could not resist and agreed to go to the guest. Carl was pouring tea, and the man asked him if today was a special day, because since the morning they had been talking about someone's return on the street. The young man replied that yes, the emperor's beloved had returned. The man was surprised. "Hasn't she always been by his side?" he asked. The conversation reached the heroine's ears and made her anxious. Carl asked if he had been living somewhere far away, because it was strange not to know anything about the news of the palace. The young man replied that he had recently returned. Leaning a little closer to the man, Carl told him about what people were saying. That she, the emperor's beloved, had died, that they had even organized a funeral for her, but later it turned out to be untrue. There is also an assumption that her health has deteriorated and she has been treated somewhere all this time. It's very strange, but the companion did return. Meanwhile, Suriella was preparing the order and listening to these fairy tales, Carla. The young man was interested in the story and asked why they thought she was dead in the first place, and whether she could have died and then been resurrected by the will of God as his favorite. Carl did not know the answer to these questions, and did not think it was possible at all. The men continued to talk, exchanging phrases about what the regular visitor was doing. The young man said that there are not as many monsters in other countries as there are here, to which Carl replied that this is because he is constantly getting rid of them. The conversation was interrupted by Suriella, who brought the guest's order. Seeing the whole pile of goodies, the man said that today Suri was extremely generous. The girl indifferently replied that she knew how good his appetite was. This adventurer manages to eat for 2 people every time he visits them, and this happens not once a day, but twice. Suriella watched the young man devour morsel after morsel with great pleasure, but she was interested in the cup of coffee that had been left untouched for several times. She decided to ask him why he always orders coffee but never drinks it. The man replied with a smile that it was because it was not Suriella who was cooking it. The answer did not impress the heroine much, and she mumbled, "Why order a drink then?" After swallowing the penultimate bite, the man wiped his lips and decided to remind the girl once again, if she changed her mind about his proposal, let her say so. The stranger smiled gently, and his eyes closed into 2 stars. Everything about him, from a touch of humor to the softness of his features, sparkled with vitality. He added that he would be very much looking forward to seeing if Suriella would agree. The heroine's thoughts floated in a mysterious current, trying to catch the key to understanding this extraordinary man. She thought he was an eccentric. The cafe wakes up under the guidance of Carl's energy. In his hands, he holds an open sign that unlocks the possibilities and taste of a new day. The windows of the coffee shop are soaking up the first rays of the sun, and the aroma of coffee emanating from the inside is intertwined with the smells of fresh pastries. While waiting for the first customer, the place was silent. Carl was eagerly reading the book, and Suri, like a child, traced different circles on the table with her fingers. The heroine stopped for a moment as if coming to her senses, and realized that she had begun to mindlessly draw the circle of rebirth again, although she did not have to go back in time. The young man, bent over a book, was so focused that he didn't even notice an unexpected cough hit him. "Carl?" the heroine called out. He turned and nodded in Suriella's direction with a sniffle. The girl said that he probably had symptoms of a cold, so he should leave early today, to which the boy replied that he felt fine because he could continue reading. Suri recalled with a smile how Carl used to swear that there was no point in studying, but now, for a person who said that, he was too serious. The heroine got up and began to escort Carl out the door. "They have no visitors, so let him read at home," she said. The guy tried to object somehow, but it was unsuccessful. While sweeping the facility, she realized that she had been having the same dream a lot lately. And in her dreams, she returns to the moment when she first saw that circle. When the workday was over, Suri checked every table and corner, putting on the magic of a great ending. The key turns in the lock, and her hands touch the door handles with careful attention. The girl makes her way down the street, where the evening sun gently illuminates her path. Her hair, fluttering in the small windows of the evening, hides the mystery of her figure. Her thoughts flew away from her, but still focused on the words of passers-by. People were talking about Charlotte. They kept thinking that she had been buried and returned alive. Perhaps the king had used his power to bring his chosen one back to life. Because of this, Suriella's gaze cautiously surveyed the people around her, and the hat became a kind of curtain in front of the eyes of strangers. But now it doesn't concern her. Now she has a different life that has nothing to do with the emperor and his beloved. Suddenly, the heroine heard a plea for help. She turned around and saw a girl with traces of fatigue and hard life on her face. Her hair was scattered, and her clothes were losing their shape as they flew off. She hadn't eaten for several days and was begging for a crumb. Remembering that Suri had a small loaf of bread in her bag, she handed it to the unfortunate woman. Her hungry eyes were filled with gratitude as she held the piece in her hands and was about to take the first sip. Not so long ago, Suri was no different from this vagrant. When she escaped from the emperor, she was forced to live in the forest for some time. Suriella ate what she brought in the basket and hid in a small pit to avoid falling into the clutches of the monsters. When her clothes were worn out, she became completely powerless, unable to move. Therefore, the heroine was forced to go to one of the districts of the capital, which was called the slums. It was characterized by the lack of basic infrastructure necessary for a full-fledged social life, so there were plenty of vagrants. Her clothes were old and drenched, and her hair was unkempt, like grass in a heavy rain. His eyes reflected fatigue from the injustice of life. Poor Suri was tearing apart the moldy bread and reflecting the drama of hunger and the sense of survival. It was then that she first met Carl, whose eyes reflected a determination to change her life, and whose face was shocked by the realities of homelessness. Now he calls Suriella his sister and has good feelings for her. But then, when Carl saw her, he sat down next to her and admitted that he had seen her several times, but this was the first time they were talking so closely. As he said these words, his hand cautiously crawled toward Suriella's coins, letting his fingers lick with tension. To distract the girl, he said that he knew everything about this place, so if she wanted to know anything, she should ask him. Her gaze, like the fire of the deep night, expressed devotion and readiness to protect her property, and the girl's hand, like an arrow, rose high in the air with Carl's. "You'll be more useful if you keep your hands to yourself," the girl said, and got up to leave. The young man got angry when he felt that the theft had failed. His eyes, which initially shone with kindness, are now filled with discontent. Carl indignantly asked her to give him at least a piece of bread before she left. Looking at the boy, Suri said that she could give him something much better if he did her a favor. In an instant, Carl's face changed. He was seduced by the offer. So Suriella wanted the boyfriend to sell her jewelry on the black market. The guy asked if she was afraid that he would steal the jewelry and run away. By the way, he was no longer as bold as he had been a few minutes earlier, and became more polite to the potential sponsor. "This will prove once again that I am unlucky," the girl replied. This answer made him feel sorry for himself. His eyes reflected a desire to help, but at the same time he realized his powerlessness. Suriella said that he didn't look like an idiot who only wanted to be served what was in a prominent place. Carl's pupils dilated at these words. The gaze fixed on Zuri expressed surprise and shock. "Or maybe you just think I am," Carl continued restlessly, as if begging for more words of praise. The heroine stopped, turned around, and slowly approached the guy. Her face reflected her desire to finally shut the impudent young man up. "Don't be so proud," the girl said. "I chose you," said Suriella to end the conversation. Carl's face looked funny at that moment. The last words confused him a bit. "He was very nice," the heroine recalled as she continued on her way home. Suddenly, Suriella felt a chill on her back. Her face, which has subtle features of tension, emphasized that she felt an indefinite threat. Cautiously, she turns around to see who might be watching her. The heroine began to wonder who it could be. a mercenary of the House of Loon or the imperial family. Charlotte is back, but the Emperor's heart is with Suriella. Without him, they cannot procreate, so it is only logical that they desperately rushed to find the heroine. So far, everything has been suspiciously quiet. Who knows what intrigues are being woven against her? She expected that they wouldn't get on her trail because she had entrusted the sale of many things to Carl. But perhaps her overconfidence got the better of her. If someone was really watching Suriella, she couldn't go home, and she knew it. Every step behind her, like a mirror of fear, reflected in the shadows and swaddled her in a sense of terror. The girl's hearing, uncertainly checking every sound, becomes distorted from the strain. In a quiet street, the girl feels that the stranger's footsteps behind her are not only disturbing, but also accelerating. Each step of Suriella's was accompanied by the sound of her own fear, and she began to walk faster, afraid that the shadow might step on her heels. The fear that grew in her chest began to mix with tears and sweat. The girl had just closed her eyes, waiting for the shadow of her pursuer to reach her shoulders. Suddenly, the heroine encountered a stone on her way, stumbling and losing her balance. A muffled groan sounded from the impact on the ground, and Zuri's face expressed acute pain. When she looked up, she felt her heart beat loudly in fear, struck by the unexpected darkness of the human form. "He's here, right behind my back," Suriella heard in her head. Carefully pulling the knife out of her bag, she was ready to strike, but mentally prayed that the stranger would just walk by. "Please," she said, and felt the coldness of a hand reaching for her back. She turned around and saw Carl in front of her. He was frightened by the sight of his adopted sister. Her face was covered with cold sweat, and she was kneeling in the middle of the street. "Are you okay?" he asked with a worried expression. Suriella was delighted to see the image of Carl instead of the mysterious stalker. Her eyes, which until recently had been full of panic, bloomed with surprise. The young man helped the girl up, noticing that her face was pale. The heroine, not having recovered from the events of the previous minutes, asked with suspicion whether he had been following her all the way. Carl was very surprised by this question. How could he pursue her? "He ran up only when he saw her," the guy said. The boy handed the girl a hat. If it wasn't Carl, who was it? Suri had a lot of questions in her head. This happened not only today. She had felt the piercing gaze before. Putting on his hat, Suriella asked him what he was doing here, as she had asked him to go home early. Carl was a little embarrassed and admitted that he was worried about her because she always comes home at this time, and so he decided to meet her so she wouldn't go alone. He felt ashamed of what he wanted to do. Furrowing his brow and looking for a place to stare, the young man mumbled, "I'm sorry." Suriella realized that she had exaggerated. She was just venting her anger, even though he had done nothing wrong. No need to apologize," said the heroine. Raising herself up on her toes, she reached for Carl's hair and gently tousled it. Suriella apologized and thanked him for worrying about her. The young man's face was distorted by a slight blush that spread across his cheeks. His eyes, which usually shone with lightness and jocularity, now expressed surprise and subtle uncertainty. When he recovered and decided to shift his attention, Carl asked if Suri had hit herself, to which she replied, "No." Looking suspiciously, the guy noticed that when she talks like that, it's usually the other way around. "Are you sure you're not hurt?" he asked again. Knowing that he would not receive a truthful answer, Carl invited Suriella to sit on his back. The girl, shocked by the boy's unexpected proposal, felt herself blushing with shame. She said no, but Carl said yes. "Your leg hurts, so hurry up, come on." The image of the boy hero attracted the attention of the street audience. Passers-by, surprised by this extraordinary shot, could not look away. But Suriella was a little uncomfortable, experiencing such a situation for the first time.
"Sister," Carl broke the silence. "I wonder what it's like to be God's favorite." His eyes were looking up hopefully for answers.
The heroine replied that she was also interested in finding out the answer to this question. The boy said that he was sure that God's love gives people incredible happiness, and he sincerely believed in it. Was Suriella happy? The heroine thought about this question and plunged into deep, sad thoughts, remembering everything that happened to her. Suddenly, Carl stopped and stood up like a shot. He asked the heroine if anyone was following her. The guy said that he realized he was not very important to Suri, but let her know that he was always on her side. Carl asked if the heroine remembered their first meeting. The girl asked again,
The first one.
The boy stops, sinking into himself, and his smile lights up the narrow streets of their memories. Their first meeting, and how Suriella caught him stealing her coins. Keeping the memories alive, the girl added that he then sold the jewelry on her behalf.
Here's the money,
he said, holding a bag of coins. Back then, Carl looked completely different. His worn clothes showed modesty, but his face remained composed in an expression of stoic dignity. Suriella thanked him, and he was completely delighted because he had never held such a large sum in his hands before. And after that, Carl helped the heroine again. He could not refuse such tasty offers.
That was the case,
The young man said, nostalgic for those times and remembering every moment. Her friendship with Carl continued, and they managed to get out of poverty together. It was then that he got this scar on his eye, a scar that crossed his right eye from cheek to forehead. When the two of them moved here, they registered the house and the coffee shop in Carl's name. When filling out the paperwork, the guy had no idea how to spell his own name. The girl's eyes expressed a little sadness when she realized that this inability was causing him internal discomfort. Suriella took the boy's palm and began to smoothly write his name with her finger. The image of her hands, creating light, graceful letters, became a language of care and concern. Even now, Carl remembers that moment to the smallest detail, and she remembers the tickle of the finger she used to write the letters of his name, and his face, which showed surprise and emotion, and which remained almost motionless in front of the heroine. His eyes spoke more than words. Suriella, you know. Carl wanted to continue the conversation, but his words were suddenly interrupted by the girl's confession. She killed people, 5 of them. The young man did not answer, but slowly swallowed his saliva, which became 10 times more viscous at that moment. Suriella thought he was scared, but what could she do about it? After a pause, Carl replied that if Suri did this, she had her reasons. The girl was surprised by these words. To diffuse the atmosphere, the guy decided to make a joke, saying that if she had killed those she simply didn't like, he would have been dead by now. Suriella felt incredibly surprised that Carl did not condemn her. Her face, previously tense in anticipation of possible condemnation, blossomed into a secret smile. The heroine decided to support the boy's joke and said that he would be next when he was a little older. "So I'm being fattened for slaughter?" laughed Carl.
What did you think?
Smiled Suri. The young man's heart was filled with joy. He loves to see that sparkle of laughter in Suriella's eyes. He wouldn't mind dying by her hand, Carl admitted. Suriella replied that it was not normal to think about such things. Finally, the heroine was able to taste the sweet taste of someone else's affection. That same night, the heroine had a dream. Her heartbeat was irregular, and her breathing was a shaky line between reality and darkness. Her face reflected a dance of invisible, frightened emotions that interacted with the nightmare scenario, and her body became chained in fear. In the dream, there was a statue that towered over her small figure, without an arm and half a head, and the heroine herself, bent in worship before the statue, trembled like a leaf on a branch, making a sincere request to the image that she hoped would answer her prayer. "Save me from," she said. Carl ran into the room. He was frightened by Suriella's condition and asked if she was okay. The girl opened her eyes, having been abruptly exposed to an uncertain threat. Her body was immobilized, and her skin was covered with cold sweat from the residual impressions. Suriella's pulse increased, her heart jumped out of her chest, and her lungs began to wheeze, unable to breathe in air. Carl wanted to touch Suri to drive the dream away and stand between her and the darkness. But with her gaze, the heroine distanced any attempt to touch. He stubbornly and expressively demonstrated the outer barrier she was putting up in front of herself and the boy's hand. Carl was impressed. He did not expect such a reaction. The hand that used to want to touch was now hanging in the air. The anxious and indignant expression on Suriella's face seemed to indicate that no touching was necessary at this time. Finding the strength to say something, the young man reminded her that she had once told him that she had chosen him herself. Then let him use it as he wants. He will only be happy about it. Carl stood with sharpened contours on his face, which showed offensive disappointment. The hand that used to stretch out to the girl is now closed in a fist. Suriella did not want the boy to look to her for the meaning of his life. That's why I told him so. She also added that he would not expect any emotions from her. Perhaps it was rude, but it was necessary to draw a clear line because uncertainty will only cause more pain. Charlotte returned today. It was for this day that Suri sold her precious stones and thought out a way to travel abroad. Gradually, it was time to stop playing house. The imperial family has not officially announced that Suriella has the heart of a dragon. So now, when all the attention is on Charlotte, is the best time to disappear. Frightened by the heroine's response, Carl pleadingly said that he could do nothing for her. He had only himself, so let her use him. The girl, reassuring the boy, told him not to think so, because in fact he had helped her a lot and even lent her his surname. The young man replied that his surname had no value because he was just a vagrant. Suriella said that if he thought so, he should make her more valuable. Let it work legally, as it does now. Let him observe, listen, and study as much as he can. May he live a good life. Carl's eyes could barely hold back tears. The guy's face was crushed with loss, but he tried to be strong, answering the heroine that it was unfair because everything she listed made sense only to him. The girl replied that he should not seek justice. That was the reward for his sincerity.
I wasn't being sincere,
Carl shouted, barely able to breathe through the tangle of emotions that were at his throat. Suriella replied that he was not always sincere because his environment forced him to be so, but in fact, by nature, he is an open person. The expression on Carl's face seemed to say that at that moment, the most important thing in the world was for him. Standing up straight and trying to hold back tears, the guy said that but hesitating on the edge, where the temptation to confess turns into a mosaic of uncertainty, he ends the sentence by saying goodnight. Turning away, he heads for the door to escape from Suriella and the emotions of this conversation. But he is stopped by the main character. She wants to tell him something else. Turning to her reassuringly, Carl expected her to want to hear the continuation of his confession. But instead, Suriella warned him that it would rain tomorrow and to bring an umbrella. The guy's face was pierced with disappointment. His eyes gave off a look of loss that went to the very depths of his soul.
Okay,
Carl replied and finally left the room, slamming the door behind him. Now that Suriella was alone, the remnants of the nightmare began to return. Lately, the same dream has been haunting the heroine. She is after meeting the emperor, she is after being adopted by the Loon family, she is in an orphanage. And she, a little girl, while living in a nameless church. These were the first memories of the main character, Suriella. Suriella thought her parents were unaware of anything. They probably wanted her to die, since they left her in the destroyed church. Fortunately, the villagers took pity on the child, and the girl managed to survive somehow. They brought her food, and she thanked them. The children of the villagers did not like Suriella, teasing her and calling her an orphan to her face. Then the war broke out. Houses were engulfed in flames, and dead people were lying in the streets. The screaming and crying of children could be heard all around. When they were defeated and became part of the empire, the persecution of religious people began. The village was destroyed, and Suriella was sent to an orphanage with other children who had previously called her an orphan. Life in the shelter was not so bad. She was always full. And while sitting in class, she listened to stories about how there is only one God in the world who... The next day, just as Suriella told Carl, it was raining. The light of lightning broke out of the darkness. People were in a hurry to find shelter from the weather. Someone was hiding under an umbrella, and someone was leaning against the walls of houses. The young lady who ran into the coffee shop was without an umbrella, so the heroine kindly offered hers. The lady was amazed by such kindness from a stranger and promised to return it tomorrow. Once again, a stranger in a robe was sitting in the institution and witnessed the girls exchanging words. Today, he was silent. The heroine was minding her own business, and the man did not know how to start a conversation and, to some extent, was even a little angry that the girl did not pay attention to him. Not knowing what to say, he asked Suri if she had an umbrella for herself. Surprised by the unexpectedness of the question, she replied that she always keeps a spare in the coffee shop. The man watched Suriella with great attention. He liked to see the girl's dedication to her work, not only doing her job, but doing it with grace and feminine elegance. The heroine asked if he would be okay because it was raining like crazy today. The stranger in the robe decided to answer Suri's question jokingly and at the same time shame her. Are you worried about me? I am impressed, he said with a smile. The girl's face suddenly turned red because of the slight shame she felt, and her eyes twinkled from the unexpected answer. The man laughed, realizing that his plan had worked.
By the way, where is the guy who is always here? He is nowhere to be found today, the red-eyed man asked.
Without looking up and stopping her work, Suriella said that it was his day off because he was sick. The man's voice changed to a sad one, and he expressed his own dissatisfaction with the unpleasant combination of illness and rainy weather. The heroine agreed and seemed to condemn Carl for going to meet her yesterday instead of staying at home and getting treatment. Instantly, Suriella's face showed anger at herself for doing this to Carl. Why hadn't she noticed this before? The girl's hand clenched the rag into a fist in an attempt to contain her emotions. Suri decided that she needed to buy him some medicine on the way home. This will probably be her last gift because after the rain stops, she plans to leave. As he continued to watch the heroine, the man caught himself thinking that she had interesting emotions, sometimes a serious face, sometimes not, and then serious again. Suddenly, the young man was overcome with a feeling of something forgotten. His expression changed from surprise to determination, as if his internal clock had reminded him of the passage of time. The man thanked me for the meal and left, leaving a slight trail of unexpected exit behind him. Watching him quickly disappear behind the door, despite the rain, she thought, I doubt he has an umbrella with him. I hope he doesn't get sick. It was already getting dark outside. There were no visitors, and it was time to close the place. Pressing herself against the door, Suriella tried to avoid the drops that were rapidly falling from the sky. Having barely stuck a few fingers on the edge of rain and dryness, she concluded that this weather would be around for a long time. She did not have an umbrella, and she told that man a lie without knowing why. Raising her hands above her hat, Suriella prepared to run in the rain. After running a few steps in the rain, her hair was already wet from the drops, but suddenly an umbrella appeared above her, shielding her from the weather. The smell of blood permeated the air and mixed with the smell of rain. In front of her stood a man whose hair covered half of his face and whose body was wrapped in a blue, expensive robe. Suri's pupils opened wide and her heartbeat began to slow down. As if responding to her true master, she asked if he had come to take the heart. The girl who looked like Charlotte is gone. Dark hair as if covered with ash and orange eyes like a wild animal. This girl was someone else, not at all like Charlotte. She was afraid that he might kill her. The heroine's eyes betrayed fear. Her eyebrows were full of anxiety, and her hands were motionlessly clasped to her waist. Her posture was tense, trying to find some kind of defense. As the two stood motionless for a while, the rain fell even faster and harder. Removing the mantle from his head, the emperor stood before Suriella. It was hard to confuse him with anyone because of his heavenly eyes. Lottie, the man said gently. This name sent the heroine into a panic. She could not believe what was happening. What did he call me? The girl kept repeating in her head. The emperor said that he had found all the jewelry she had hidden and held out a palm full of stones. These were the stones that Carl sold on the black market instead of Suriella. The words that could have found their way to Suri's lips remained extremely unspoken. The girl spoke thoughtfully. How is this possible? But the image in her eyes was as real as the reflection of water in a crystal mirror.
Let's go back, said Raymond, to where you belong.
Suddenly the girl began to suffocate, clutching her outerwear. She asked herself who Lottie was for him and where she should be. The girl's angry face was expressed by bent eyebrows and a furrowed forehead, giving the impression of mesmerized aggression. I'm not Lottie, she said through her teeth. She also added that the real Charlotte had returned to His Majesty. In past lives, at the very moment that girl returned, the real Charlotte became Lottie, and she, Suriella, was not called anything. The heroine asked why he called her that, and whether it could be because of the elix she received from him. If it's really because of him, then let her have it, because it never belonged to her. The girl said that he had given her his heart, so he should know how to return it. The emperor ignored Suriella's words and continued to repeat Lottie incessantly. He looked tired and exhausted, but still there was a bit of joy in his eyes. The heroine was very angry that Raymond did not react to her. She almost shouted with tears in her eyes, saying that she was not Lottie, not his Charlotte, and not even the Lund's daughter. We have nothing to do with each other, she concluded. At some point, she felt that her head would not be able to withstand such tension. Suriella said in a quieter, calmer voice, "Take Elix and dispel your doubts. Isn't that why you came here?" The king replied that yes, he had come to see her to correct his mistake. Znicek Raymond touched the heroine's cheek, and she shuddered as if an electric current had passed through her body. The emperor continued that it was precisely because he wanted to correct the mistake that she should return to where she belonged, and when his task was completed, the heroine would understand everything. "Please trust me again," he concluded in a pleading voice. During the conversation, the umbrella, as if tired of being held in his hand, flew down and found its last resting place in a puddle. Suriella felt sick. Who knew that asking her to trust him would cause such a reaction? She was about to throw up. Digging her fingernails into the skin of her palm in anger, Suri asked again, "Do you want me to trust you?" Even the Duchess of Lun, who used it to the very end, never asked for this. Trust the emperor. Until now, that's all she's been doing, and she's only been getting betrayed in return. It was like the end of a cruel fairy tale, where the heroine was thrown away as soon as she became unnecessary. No one can change the end of this fairy tale, even His Majesty. "Your Majesty," said Suriella, looking up at the emperor. "Do you want me to carry your child?" she asked in horror. "This did not happen in my past lives, and this will not happen." Suriella realized that she had to keep her cool and figure out where her value lay. Personally, as an individual, not as a replacement for Charlotte. There was only one thing on Juri's mind. Does the emperor want her to carry his child? What if Elix cannot be returned because there is no way back? Could this mean that the emperor was trying to deceive her so that she would give birth to his child instead of Charlotte? If her task is to become a surrogate mother, as her mother would have wanted, all these thoughts were swarming in the heroine's head. But in a flash, Suriella thought it couldn't be the baby. Even if there is no trust between them, the emperor cannot treat her so cruelly. She wants what he said and convinced her. But Raymond looked at her silently. The girl burst out laughing hard and suggested that the worst was probably yet to come. Without waiting for any explanation or acknowledgement from the emperor, she told him to come back tomorrow because she needed time to get ready. The man agreed. He looked as if he wanted to say something important, but the words got stuck somewhere in his throat, lost in his indecisive eyes. His hand stretched out in the girl's direction, but she passed by like a light breeze. Raymond's face expressed inexplicable disappointment. The sadness in his eyes deepened, but he remained standing there, looking in the direction of where Suriella had gone. The rain never stopped falling. The girl was making her way without an umbrella. Her steps were heavy and slow, as if the water beneath her was draining the strength from her legs. She felt that she was about to run out of breath. She sped up, and her mind had only one thing on her mind: how to get away from this place anywhere. The heroine was running in the rain, fleeing from the invisible shadows of her own thoughts. Her hair, sticky with raindrops, sails around her, as if dispelling everything that has happened to her. My feet moved rapidly through the puddles. Each step created a miniature explosion of water that splashed around. People's faces flashed before Suriella's eyes. She didn't know where she was running to, but she knew she didn't want to stop. "Someone, please!" the girl cried out in her mind, choking. As if hearing this cry, the man suddenly turned around. Before she knew it, Suri was burying her face in the stranger's chest. The blow was instantaneous, but it managed to revive the girl from her condition. "Is it a person?" the girl doubted without looking up. "I should be more careful." An apologetic expression flashed in her eyes. Suddenly, the man stopped the girl by the arm. His palm was warm and relaxed, but at the same time carried some incredible power. Suriella was frightened by her husband's sudden grip, not knowing his intentions. Her face expressed surprise and anxiety. The girl's eyes immediately rounded, and her steps stopped nervously. The heroine politely wanted to ask the stranger to let go of her hand, but he interrupted her by saying that it was wet. Both stood motionless and looked silently into each other's eyes. The stranger spoke gently and slightly reproachfully.
"You told me you had an umbrella."
Realizing that she was facing the same regular visitor to the coffee shop, she lowered her head like a child being scolded and said that she had lost her umbrella. The man said that she was a very bad liar. Suriella was surprised that the man recognized her lie. She stood with open eyes and a frozen expression. For him, her face was like an open book, in which he could read not only words but also expressions of doubt or fiction. Suri looked up in surprise when the man gently touched her face. His fingers took on the softness of the skin. At that moment, she felt like time stopped and the whole world disappeared, leaving only their faces in a dance of tenderness. The stranger's look was filled with affection, but at the same time, a distant longing was felt. Every drop of rain expressed a part of his invisible feelings. "Let's leave this place together," he said to the heroine. Well, it was an attractive offer. Suriella replied that she was not sure she could agree. Usually she doesn't attach importance to such words, but now for some reason she can't take them for a joke. The man's eyes glowed red like hot lava as he looked at the heroine. Energy shone through the narrow pupils, like an invisible force radiating from the depths. After meeting her eyes, the girl suddenly faced a sharp, piercing pain. At that moment, a headache pierced her like an invisible wedge, stabbing her every movement and every breath. Saying her thoughts out loud, Suri said she was not sure of anything else. It was the most honest answer I could think of. The girl's head was splitting so badly that it seemed like it was going to burst. Suddenly, the stranger asked, if he had known that this was how things would turn out, should he have taken her, even if it would have led to her death? And if her answer was yes, then by that moment he would have been her grave, the man said. Every pulse of pain pierced Suriella's head, making her lose control of what was happening around her. This made it difficult for her to understand his words. The man continued to tell Suriella something, but she could not hear anything. All the words disintegrated into letters before reaching her ears. The heroine was almost hysterical. She pleadingly asked him what he had said. Her eyes were filled with fear and helplessness. In this wave of panic, the world became silent for her. Realizing that the only connection with this stranger was disappearing, his hand, she felt a great emptiness because of what seemed to her to be important words that were not heard. When she opened her eyes, she was standing alone in the middle of the street with an umbrella in her hands. Her face expressed surprise and confusion, and her eyes were wide open, trying to see the signs of what had happened. There was no man in front of her, and it was as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Carl was at home. The cold that had enveloped the air for the entire day made his temples throb. Suddenly, the guy quickly raised his head, feeling as if something was falling. The boy's large brown eyes reflected the slight anxiety caused by the mysterious sound. He looked down, trying to figure out the origin of the sound. When he went out into the hallway, he saw Suriella. The girl sat in front of the door helplessly. The girl's hand reached for the door and her fingers tiredly tried to unlock it. Carl shuddered at the state of the heroine. His gaze was full of anxiety, as if he himself was experiencing the same misfortune as Suri. "Did you get wet in the rain?" he asked. "We have to get out of here," Suriella said, and she gently but firmly put her hand on Carl's arm. The heroine asked Carl to say that he did not know her if anyone asked. The guy was horrified by these words. He was not ready to hear this and did not understand why she said it at all. But Suri realized that if the emperor had the stones she sold on the black market, he might find out about Charles. And perhaps when she escapes, he may be the first to be caught. The young man began to ask why he said that. He thought that maybe it was because of what he said last night and started apologizing. He didn't want her to go anywhere and didn't want to lose her. Suriella reminded Carl of what she had said, that she had killed 5 people, adding with a smile that perhaps her 6th murder could be very miserable. Carl is angry at the heroine's frivolity because he doesn't care what she does or who she kills. He will always support her in any circumstances, no matter what she is. The girl thanked him and said that she just decided to remind him of this, just in case, so that he doesn't forget.